My name is Stephen Goakes and I'm the Managing Director of Natgen Group, and I'm here today to talk to you about Natgen Development Trust BL26. Natgen Development Trust BL26 is going to be developing a site it's actually called Bigara Waters on the Gold Coast. I would probably call it Labrador or Arundel, but it's somewhere in there. It's a 2-acre site. It's a really well located site near the corner of Pine Ridge Road and the Gold Coast Highway, which is a really premium area of the northern Gold Coast. We're going to be producing warehouse units which are somewhat similar to what we've done in the past. The Natgen type short-term development projects all are quite similar in terms of the product that we're producing, and that's very much deliberate because that goes along with our philosophy of why we're finding value in this type of development at this particular time in the market. So for BL26 we expect to produce about 24-25 warehouses on the long site that's there off this very busy and well trafficked road. I want to be able to explain to you why it's such a very strategic location on the northern end of the Gold Coast. When looking at this specific site and why we're interested in it and why we've chosen it for our next development trust, I think I need to go back a couple of steps and talk about what's happening on the Gold Coast in general, and probably even southeast Queensland in general in relation to industrial and what the supply and demand dynamics are within that market. So first of all, we have a supply constrained market across southeast Queensland, and in fact the Property Council and various private consultants have produced reports which indicate that basically southeast Queensland is running out of developable industrial land, and that's going to happen any time between, some pundits suggest, 2027 and 2030. So it's very proximate. There's a significant issue with the supply constraints in industrial land. Now, Brisbane is probably the earliest to run out of industrial land. Gold Coast a little bit behind that, but not too far because of our land use constraints. As I've mentioned in previous of our developments, we've got to the east, we've got the sea, which we can't build on that. We've got mountains to the west. We've got the New South Wales border to the south. So really the northern end of the Gold Coast is the only expansion area. And there's some issues with that too, because there's some really good arable land in there and also some flooding issues. So we have to make sure that we use every piece of land that we can for industrial where we can. So that's a supply issue. In terms of demand issues, we've got a massively growing population, one of the highest population growth areas in the country. And we know from considerations of what our current population uses for industrial that we're likely to need many hundreds of thousands of square metres of extra industrial and logistics space over the next few years as the population grows. So where do we find that? Well, we find it in the few greenfield sites that are left, but also we're going to have to go brownfield. So sites that are currently being used for existing lowish level industrial purposes have to be upscaled to a higher and better use effectively, and that's where BL26 comes in. In fact, it's the first Natgen trust that we have gone from greenfield development to brownfield redevelopment. And that's because of the value of the site. The site is on a major road, very close to a major intersection with the Gold Coast Highway, also known as Brisbane Road. And in fact, that part of what's called Brisbane Road or the Gold Coast Highway was historically the main way to get into the Gold Coast from the north. So anyone who drove from Brisbane to the Gold Coast passed through this area. Now, this was before the M1 existed. So the M1 is now effectively the spine of transport in the Gold Coast, but we have these very major east-west crossroads that go out from the spine towards the east or the west, mainly towards the east. And Brisbane Road is one of the major northern ones of those. So it's built up over probably a 30-year period into a very major commercial and industrial and retail hub. So when you have a look at the photos of where we've got our BL26 site, and you look from there towards the sea, it's a massively large commercial area. But again, a lot of that area has been developed, so we need to start redeveloping that into higher and better uses, and BL26 is at the vanguard of that process. The other thing that we have is, I mentioned it before, but population growth is an imperative in this part of the world, which it's not going away. We've had positive population growth on the Gold Coast ever since I can remember, and that has actually probably accelerated due to the fact that the Gold Coast is now turning from what was a lifestyle, holiday, sort of tourism town into actually a major city. And in fact, bigger than Hobart, bigger than Darwin, and bigger than Canberra. So actually, the Gold Coast is bigger than 3 Australian capital cities. And that gives it a different complexion in how it operates. So first of all, it's got an internal market now. The Gold Coast market used to be the tourism market of Australia, and now it's got a built-in industrial base, particularly strong educational base, particularly strong healthcare base, as well as the leisure and activities that it's always had. So the broadening of the economic base augurs well for actually more population growth into the Gold Coast and the Gold Coast region as we go forward. The other interesting factor that's happening there is, of course, the Gold Coast and Brisbane are now actually joining up into a sort of mega metropolitan area. And I've sort of looked at other places. The one that really comes to mind to me in terms of how this has happened, what we can expect, is when basically LA and San Diego came together through, again, population spread. Now those 2 cities are a little bit further apart than Gold Coast and Brisbane, but not that far. So we will see quite similar 2 hubs at each end, but there'll be that similar growth together of various regions in between, where probably people don't really know whether they come from Brisbane or the Gold Coast when they're in that space. Bigger Waters here is definitely a Gold Coast location, so it's at the northern end of that major metropolitan area that we know as the Gold Coast. So the people that occupy these type of premises will be basically providing service to the Gold Coast. But one of the things about it is that if you provide service to the Gold Coast, you've got to have access to the M1. It's the major and currently only spine through the city. We've talked in the past about the Coomera connector, which is coming, which will supplement but certainly not replace the M1. So being able to get to the M1 relatively easily and quickly is crucial for any logistics requirements on the Gold Coast. So here we are, we're in Pine Ridge Road, about 100 metres from the Gold Coast Highway or Brisbane Road. Brisbane Road has direct access to the west to both the Coomera connector and the M1, and then you've got access to the rest of the Gold Coast market. And also, that's if you turn left. If you turn right, you've also got access to the Brisbane Gold Coast corridor and also Brisbane, which is significantly less than an hour away. When it comes to design of the building, I'm very much aware that what you see in our information memoranda is often a very, very small representation of what we end up with. And if you look at all the previous Natgen Development Trust IMs compared to what has been produced, they've all been kind of bigger and better than what we say in the IM. And that's deliberate. So what we put in offer documents is always, what we know at that stage we can deliver, but then we go through a significant process of upscaling what we can do, both in terms of amenity, hopefully visual amenity, also size, and of course saleability. So that's why we're getting a pretty good reputation now of delivering returns from Natgen Development Trusts, which are significantly ahead of what has been targeted in the offer documents. In the case of this particular project, we've suggested it's going to be effectively a series of what I call Natgen sheds, which are sort of this warehouse, industrial style sheds, all in a line which is very similar to what we've done in the past. But as I alluded to previously, we end up tweaking those designs to provide better access, better tenant amenity, better finishes, and basically an all-over better product than what we get from the start. So you can expect the same thing from BL26. We're going through that same process. The decisions have to be made based on what I'd call the lowest and worst use that we've got, which is what we put in our offer document. And then we go through an iterative process to get to the highest and best use. Particularly right now, BL26 will be one of the first Natgen Development Trusts to benefit from our new staff member, Daniel Mulheron, who is a town planner by profession, but he's come in as a full-time development manager with Natgen. And we're already seeing the benefit of having someone in-house that can provide specific town planning and development expertise in areas which really complements what we already had within our team in terms of the directors and of course Mark Jewell, who leads that process as well. So what that will give us is we expect advantages in terms of timing and the ability to understand quickly and easily what we can do and what fits within the town planning constraints. And that's actually really crucial. The other crucial aspect of that is to know if there's any state government agencies that need to be involved and how the required approvals from state government agencies fit with the local government agencies, because there are demarcation issues with relation to those two things. So generally that whole area of our business has been upgraded pretty substantially lately, and we see that as a real benefit to unit holders going forwards. When it comes to the design of the actual buildings that we'll be building in BL26, again, you're seeing an evolution there of what the Natgen product is. We are seeing that within the market, the demand continues to be for things that are getting higher quality, and this sort of feeds into where we're seeing a lot of our tenants and our owners being more sort of lifestyle businesses rather than truly industrial. They are industrial businesses, but they're lifestyle industrial, which is a term that maybe I just made up then, I don't know, but that's what we're seeing. So those sort of businesses are requiring higher levels of fit and finish. So we are now fully painting all our warehouses. We're providing high quality flooring. The kitchens and bathrooms are updated from what we've done previously. Flow-through ventilation, where possible, is becoming a bigger issue, as is climate control and access requirements to the outside. So all of those things are ticking up each time we do a new development in relation to both feedback that we have from the people who buy the strata units and also the tenants that get into them. One of the areas that's been really useful to us is with our CM23 Development Trust, which is at Coomera, which finished at the end of last year. And we made a significant uplift in return for the unit holders compared to what they were expecting. I think the offer document suggested around the 25% mark, and I think it was 37 point something percent was actually delivered to them within time. So one thing that happened in that development is we've got our new office in that place. We're there right now. And it's given us, for a second time, another opportunity to really have a good indication of what's actually happening on these sites, because we're here, we're watching, we're seeing who is actually going into these developments and what they're doing. And compared with our UC19 development, which our last office was in our first development for the last 5 years, we're certainly seeing an uptick in those issues that I just referred to, the lifestyle type tenancies. And also we're hearing from the people who are our neighbours what they like and what they don't like about their units, and we're able to put all of that into the mix of what we're doing in future. So for example, in this case we've had people who don't like door locks, something really quite prosaic, but very easy to change, very easy to do better, And it's other things like making sure that the electricity boxes in these places are in the right places, making sure that the fridge openings in the kitchens are wide enough to take a bigger fridge, because when we were doing this 6 or 7 years ago, we'd think people would just have a little bar fridge in an industrial unit. Now they've got 2-door massive fridges. So again, with every Natgen development trust, the access and egress to the site is always really, really important. And in this case it is as well, because of the nature of the site. We actually have 2 entrances, 2 accesses to the site, which are actually going to provide access to 2 different parts of the site probably. That again wasn't shown in the offer document, but we've come up with that since the offer. So in this case we can actually get an articulated vehicle into the site, down the back, turned around and back out by the same entrance, which is really useful. It means we're not reliant on any sort of easement arrangements with neighbours or any of that sort of thing. And in fact, you'll find that most Natgen developments, in fact, all of the Natgen developments have had an ability to get in and out of the site by 2 different entrances. And this is actually no different. So the other thing that's really, really important is parking ratios, making sure we provide more parking than is necessary within the town planning requirements, because parking is key in these locations, particularly in places where on-street parking is really not an option. You have to provide enough parking on site for the uses available. And in this case, we're certainly over the parking requirements. Another thing that we've done within the last few Natgen developments, last 2 or 3 Natgen developments, is providing some parking actually within the units themselves, because that again provides a higher standard of parking for people who don't want to be in a car park, they want their car out of the weather and all that sort of stuff. So that's all capable of being accommodated within BL26, UC26 and also some of the 2025 developments. I'm often asked who our end users are for our strata title developments, or the end buyers. And the buyers fall into 2 groups. First of all, there's owner-occupiers who are going to use them for their own business ventures. And also there's people who are buying them as investments and will be tenanting them. And again, we've seen a variation over the years of who those people are. And if you think about it in terms of the densification of the whole Gold Coast environment, we have to fit another 500,000 people into this town over the next 15 to 20 years. How do you do that when you don't have masses of open space? The answer is densification. More people are living on smaller allotments or in apartments or in townhouses or in massive towers. The fact is that provides excellent lifestyle for people, but it takes off them some opportunity to store things in their own home areas. So for example, if you're a tradie with 2 or 3 employees, you've probably had the ability to store some of your materials and a couple of trailers or utes or something in your 1,000 square metre allotment somewhere. As those allotments get smaller and people live smaller, there's a necessity to put those things somewhere else. And the other thing that's really important to understand is that the smaller types of units that we've got here are actually the cheapest bits of real estate you can buy. You simply cannot buy an apartment or a house on the Gold Coast for what you can buy a commercial property for. So a lot of tradie type people are migrating into these sort of things. A lot of people who would have run previously home-based businesses are moving into these type of premises. For example, right here in CM23, we've got a dog walking business here. They sell dog walking services and premium food for pets. So previously that's something that I would have perceived might have been a home-based business for some people, run out of the garage or what have you. But now it's actually a full-grown lifestyle business. And there's other similar ones here. A shift from the home-based business to the industrial park-based business. And it's also an opportunity for people to get on the property ladder with less money than they could to do any other type of purchasing on the Gold Coast. And as As property gets more and more expensive, this becomes a very relevant type of property investment for a lot of people, particularly young people. Anyone who's been following Natgen for a time, and particularly Natgen development trusts, will be familiar with our due diligence arrangements for these type of things. And it starts particularly with site location. So you have to look at the location elements first to see if the site that you're looking at is in a place where people will want to be and people will want to do business. And I've actually touched on that previously in terms of population growth, activity, growth of the area to continue to attract people and to make sure the area is not going to fall out of favour with people. Now on the Gold Coast, with the growth dynamics that we have, there's no areas that you would expect will stop being used for any given usage. It's actually going to grow. So that one tick. All the other site attributes are pretty easily ticked in this location just near the Gold Coast Highway, and again, as I mentioned, access to the major transport routes. So then we come to the actual site. In this case it was kind of important because the site it's a large site, it's long and thin, so you have to work out how to best utilise the various attributes of the site. There's a fall from the road to the back of the site of a series of metres. I'm going to say 3 metres, 3.5 metres. And that's pretty significant as well as to how to design something that takes account of that articulation. Not only just takes account of it, but makes it a feature and makes it better, makes the design better because of that. I think we've come up with some really good solutions for that. The construction feasibility is really important because that's cost control is a way that we make sure that we exceed our forecasts. So really we've made sure that everything is buildable, and really buildability is something that we talk about a lot, and it's important in everything we do. Having sites that are particularly unable to get access to build can really cause problems, so we steer clear of those sort of sites. And really it's just taking those same due diligence aspects that you see in every one of our projects and applying those to this brownfield site, which I mentioned previously. Our previous developments have all been greenfield sites, so we look at this site as if it was a greenfield site and then overlay what extra issues are brought by the brownfield nature of it. In other words, there's already some structures on it which we have to remove. There's already some geotechnical issues which we have to check, and we've done all that and it's ticked off fine, so we're happy with the result. In terms of definitions, talking about two types of development, a greenfield site and a brownfield site. Quite simply, a greenfield site is somewhere that has never been built on before. It's land that's been probably subdivided into an allotment, and what we build on it is the first time that anything's going to be built on it. I call a brownfield site something that's had a previous use, previous structures and previous development on it. And probably the biggest difference between the two is the brownfield sites are older and probably in more established areas. And also there is the issue of having to remove structures and remove any contamination or anything else that's gone along with that use of the site previously. The BL26 trust is showing an expected return at this stage of 25.2% over the term of the trust, which is expected to be up to 2 years. Again, this is a targeted equity growth number, so basically you can expect that at the end of the period of the trust, unit holders get back their capital first, their dollar unit first, and then the amount of profit that comes from the sale of the strata units in the development. And that's the 25%, 25.2% is that profit uplift we're expecting in this case. As I've said, there's opportunities for further growth in that as we go through our value engineering process, and also looking at the highest and best use we can get from the site based on the general proposition of what we're doing. And actually one other thing that I'm regularly asked is, like with CM23, how do you get 37.2% when you said it was going to be 25%? What are the factors at play there? So first of all, there's cost factors and revenue factors. And we like to think that in both cases we're quite conservative in our original numbers. So the cost of producing the product, the cost of the walls and the ceilings and the fit outs and what have you, we know that with some specificity before we start. Obviously we've got quotes and tenders from builders, and we make sure that we've added a sort of security margin on top of that for just general safety, I guess, general conservatism. And then of course we add another margin of say 5% of building costs on as a contingency, and that's all included. We expect we've spent that once we get to the 25.2%. At the other end, we take advice from valuers and from selling agents, etc., about what we expect the stratas to sell for when they're produced. And we make sure that we take the conservative views on those as well. So we'll often have a 10% variance in the expected price of the sale price of the end units, and we err on the side of conservatism in that case. So really there's revenue potential upside and there's a cost potential upside. I'd be remiss for saying also that there's potential downsides too in terms of costs and sale prices, and that has to be remembered when investing in anything that isn't absolutely certain. But as I say, we take a reasonably conservative view so that there's a fair bit of fat built into our projections. During the life of a Natgen development trust, there's a series of milestones on the way from a raw piece of land to built finished product. And generally speaking, some of those milestones are outlined in our information memoranda, just in general in terms of when we're settling the site, when we select a builder, when construction commences, when we expect construction to end. But there's a whole lot of other sort of micro milestones, if I can call them that, on the way through. And they include things like when the tilt slabs get poured, when they get raised, when the roofs go on, and various things like that. And the way that the unit holders in the trust know about those things is through our reporting process. So we seek to report enough but not too much. There's a bit of a Goldilocks amount that we hear from our unit holders that they want to hear from us. They don't want to hear every single thing that's going on because they may as well be building it themselves if they're doing that. They just want to know how it's going. They want to know that the rhythm and the measure of a development is happening as we expect. And that's what we seek to provide in our reporting structures. So I would suggest generally you'd expect to hear from us every couple of months. It's not a very specific time frame between reports, but usually something's happened every couple of months. And when significant things are happening, like a lot of sales or settlements and things, you'll hear more regularly. So it's not a very specific process like it is for our investment trusts where you get a report every 3 months on the dot. It's a very specific time frame. I'm often asked about pre-sales with our strata unit developments, and it's an interesting question because it's a bit of a double-edged sword, pre-sales, because whilst it provides some level of certainty for the project, it also provides a level of rigidity for the project as well. So we see that whilst we try for some pre-sales, we don't put a lot of effort into pre-sales because we find that these types of developments and the type of buyers for them really need to see and touch and walk around the developments. And because of the size and scale and the funding models, we have the ability to wait until we get sort of walls up, roofs on, doors in, before people have to really come and have a look. So for example, with our Yarrabilba project, YB24, which we've recently within the last month, we've just sold it out, 15 units. We were sitting there on about half the sales, half the pre-sales for 4 or 5 months prior to settlement. And we'd made the strategic decision to not to try and keep selling until we got to the end. So when it was actually finished, the gates were on, the plants were in the ground, the greenery was there, and it looked really perfect. We opened up the sales again, and the other half of the project sold out within 2.5 weeks. So it's another indication that that process of making sure that you're selling something which is a semi-lifestyle type product is being sold in the way that you sell semi-lifestyle type things. So pre-sales are a thing, but they're something that we don't overly rely on. Another example of that is our RY25 Development Trust, which is the residential subdivision at Yatala. Again, it's in the process of being constructed at the moment, and the shape and scale of the development is now clear to see on the land. But we've decided not to attempt any pre-sales yet until we're very close to the end, because again, to the untrained eye, it looks like a big dirt pile, even although all the important bits are there. But when the roads are in and the grass is green and the trees are up and all the entry statements and all those things are in place, that's when people will come along and say, yes, I can see myself living here. Right now, we could sell that development out literally tomorrow. But for those people who would buy it, it would be a financial decision, and we'd be limiting the financial return to somewhat close to what we've put in the offer document. My expectation is that the sale prices of those will increase substantially, and thus the return will increase substantially. But I guess we shall wait and see. What gives Natgen confidence that the project can be delivered successfully? I would say that really it's about, well, first of all, look at everything we've done in the past, and I would encourage all our investors to look at our actions as much as our words, and when looking at other investments, same thing, make sure that actions and words are aligned. But we have a track record of producing exactly this type of product, which small scale industrial strata units, and that's been going since 2019, and we've produced a number of results in that time. I think the other thing to note there is that it's kind of important to stick to your knitting and do what you know. So we do that as much as possible. Whilst we're doing these sort of projects, we're considering other types of projects as well. And one thing that, when I've just said that, stick to your knitting, I know someone will think, well, you've got a residential subdivision at Yatala, what's that all about? Well, I've actually been developing personally residential subdivisions since last century and have done quite a few of them, so I kind of know what to look for there. So each time we do this, our corporate knowledge and memory increases, so we're getting better, we're getting more efficient, and all those things should come together to A, reduce risk, and B, improve return for unit holders. I've been asked how BL26 fits within the development pipeline for Natgen's broader development strategy, and I think it's probably, if you look at what we've done over the last few years, I think it's actually pretty self-evident. It's a similar type of product. It's again in a high growth area, so we're looking for areas that provide us with absolute, as far as possible, certainty as to growth and economic growth. And we build things that we know we can build. We know how much they're going to cost to build. So we look at all the variables and we tick them off one by one. So whilst development is seen as a riskier process than just an investment hold, for example, and that's probably true, all of the variables can be measured and all the variables can be managed, and that's what we do all day, every day. That's how we work. So again, in terms of pipeline, the right location, a product that we know well, a market that we know well, and deliverability with our various partners who can provide us with building services and the various other and sales services that we need to actually create, design, build and deliver what we've got. So I encourage you to have a look at our Natgen Development Trust, and Hopefully, when you look through the offer document, you will find that the things that I've spoken about today are mentioned within that document. And if you look through our past record of production and successful conclusion of these things, you should be looking for those things that make that clear. And those things are developed strategy, making sure that locational issues are dealt with, deliverability, saleability, and if you find all those things, you'll see that what's coming up in the future will also fulfill those same requirements. And if you ever see a Natgen development trust that's got you scratching your head thinking, what's this all about, because it doesn't seem like it fulfills the general Natgen process, then ask us, because we'll have a very good reason for it. It will be a clearly developed strategy of something else. But in this case, you can expect to see more of this on the way through.